Hi, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make a machine that can hover or even fly like a plane or like a drone. So let me show that to you. Now, the way we're going to build a machine that hovers, you need to have two components. The first component is called multimeter. If you select this multimeter button that's in the menu, a multimeter looks like a box, and this box is actually a sensor that detects its own position, velocity, angle, and acceleration. You can use this multimeter attached to certain other components so that the component will react in accordance to what the multimeter is receiving. So first, bring up a multimeter and select the second component that's called rocket. I am going to arrange the pieces of these components in a certain way so that the machine will hover at a certain altitude. So let me do that. To make a simple hovering machine, you just need to use three components. You first need a multimeter and a source of thrust, and there are two components within Golems that produce a thrust effect. The first component is called rocket, and I'm going to be using that to make this hovering machine. As you can see on the screen, I have arranged a multimeter that is attached to a rocket. And if I go to the wire mode of the game, I have also spawned up a component that is called function. This function can be attached to these components so that these components can be linked together so that the multimeter will give a certain value level of power to the rocket component that is attached to it. To make something hover in this game, you just need to attach the function component to the multimeter, and the multimeter needs to be attached to the rocket, and the rocket be attached back to the function component. So let me do that. As you can see on the screen, I have attached the multimeter to the rocket, and the rocket to the function, and the function back to the multimeter. This will create some sort of feedback loop that the multimeter will feed into the function that will also output the function's value into the rocket component so that the machine will be able to maintain an altitude in the multimeter setting. To make the machine hover reliably, you need to go to the function setting by selecting the component and changing the curve function to the function that is called slope in this drop-down menu. When you select slope, the function graph will turn to a shade of gray. This is the setting that we want so that the machine will hover properly. When you put these components together, there's going to be things that needs to be adjusted or fine-tuned so that the machine will hover stably. And one of those settings is the amount of thrust that the rocket component is producing. That needs to be adjusted and tuned so that the rocket will not be too powerful to hover or too strong. Or the opposite, we don't want the rocket to be too weak. If it's too weak, then it can't provide enough thrust to get itself off the ground. So I will adjust the thrust so that the machine will hover stably. If you select the rocket component and go to the rocket tab of the rocket component, you can see a setting that is called maximum force newtons. The default number for the maximum force of a rocket thruster is set to default at 10. We can change this number to any number that we want. So I'm going to change this number to 100. Now the rocket will produce 100 units of Newton force. If you want to make a machine to hover at a certain altitude, you need to set the multimeter setting to altitude. So let me show that to you. First, you select the multimeter, click enter, and go to the multimeter tab of the properties window. And as you can see, when you spawn up a multimeter, it will be set at default to the setting altitude. If you select this drop-down menu, you can see the other settings of the multimeter. So if you want to make a machine that hovers at a certain altitude, leave it at altitude. You can see these two numbers. The first number is labeled as maximum height. For this, I'm going to change the number to 20. This is 20 units. If you want to make a hovering machine that hovers at a certain altitude, the number in the setting of the maximum height setting number correlates to the height of the cube object. In this case, I want my machine to hover at 20 blocks above the surface of the platform. So to change the number, I will change it to 20. The number 20 represents 20 blocks as the altitude of where the machine is going to hover. The second setting is called minimum height. For this setting, the machine can actually change its altitude within a certain range. So if I set this range to 10, the machine is able to change its height and maintain the height or a certain distance from the platform until it reaches the maximum height limit. It will make the rocket component go to 100% thrust to try to maintain the maximum height of 20 units or 20 blocks above the surface of the platform. So let me test it out. As you can see, the machine is hovering about 20 blocks above the surface of the platform. I can use my cursor to manipulate the machine while the simulation is running. So I can left click on the machine, drag the machine around to see how it behaves. So if I drag the machine below the altitude, you can see that the thrust or rocket particle effects becomes more vibrant or becomes larger. The machine is producing more thrust to move itself back to the desired altitude that I programmed in the multimeter. So when I let go of the machine will go back to the fixed height that I put in the multimeter setting. If I move the machine above the desired altitude, the rocket thrust will actually invert or go in the opposite direction. The thrust is now facing upwards, which will make the machine go back down, which will make the machine travel downwards. So when I let go of the machine naturally puts itself back at the programmed desired height. There is another component in Golems that produces thrust, and this component is called force beam. You can use a force beam just like how you can use a rocket component. The force beam will produce a reactive thrust, and you can attach this component exactly as I did with the rocket component. So, to make a hovering machine using the force beam as the engine of the machine, you just need to go to the menu and select the button that says force beam. And when you're in the wire mode of the game, it shows you the green node of the component. And this force beam node is the output or where the beam will be emitting. So we want this output node to be facing down in the opposite direction of the hovering machine to produce the thrust like the rocket component. You can attach a force beam in the same way that you attach a rocket component to a function into the multimeter. If you want to use a force beam as the rocket thruster of a hovering machine, you would need to wire the function in the multimeter as a negative polarity wire attached to the green output node of the force beam. So let me show that to you. I will select the yellow node of the function and hold down the Alt key, and that will change the polarity of the wire, which will change the color of the wire to red. This means that the wire is now inverting the output of the function. I will also do the same thing for the multimeter attached to the force beam. To change the amount of thrust that a force beam is producing, you just need to select the component, which is the force beam, and go to the setting that says force beam, and you can see there is a setting that is called max grapple / push force. This setting, you can change the Newton force of thrust. I'm going to change this thrust number to 100, and I am going to leave the other settings as is for now. Now that I have assembled these two components, this machine with a force beam acting as the rocket engine should hover in the same exact way, just like the machine I made earlier that used a rocket component as the engine. Now that I have assembled this hovering machine, the machine should be able to hover stably. So let me show that to you. This machine should hover in the same exact way like how I did with the other machine that I made earlier. The only difference is the engine has been replaced by a force beam component. So let me start the simulation. As you can see, the machine is hovering at the same height as did with the other machine that I've made earlier. Except there's a visual difference between the rocket component and a force beam component. A force beam component produces a beam that is like a laser, and this beam is actually producing a outward force. So if I move the machine while the simulation is running, the appearance of the beam will maintain its appearance. So if I try to force the machine to go below the desired altitude or the program altitude, the appearance of the beam doesn't change. When I let go of the machine, you can see the machine gradually goes back to the desired altitude height. But the appearance of the beam will change if I move the machine above the altitude. Then the beam color has now become the color blue. The color blue of the force beam indicates that the beam is now producing a negative force. So the machine actually wants to go towards the direction of the beam instead of away of the direction of the beam. So when I let go of the machine, it will descend and then change the force beam color back to red, which means positive, which means it's producing a rocket-like reaction force to make the machine hover back to the desired height that I have programmed in the machine. This hovering machine is inherently not stable. This hovering machine is stable because the design of this machine is well balanced and nothing is interacting with the machine. So it will hover stably where it currently is. But this machine itself will be unstable if something interacts or collides with this machine. So let me show you what an unstable hovering machine looks like. This machine is currently hovering, but I can make the machine become unstable if I click and drag on the machine and make the machine collide with a gray platform. So let me show you. Let me start the simulation again and let me drag the machine a couple more times to show you how unstable the machine inherently is. Since this machine is simple in construction, the machine does not have a way to keep itself stable. So to make a hovering machine stable no matter what interacts with the machine, you will need to incorporate a control system to maintain the machine direction so that the machine will become stable no matter what interacts with the machine. Let me show you some machines that I've created in Golems that are able to fly stably and with programmed input controls. Here is a helicopter that I've created utilizing those hovering machines. This helicopter design, it has multiple hovering components that makes it able to fly just like a helicopter does. So let me show it to you. As you can see, the helicopter is hovering at a specific altitude, and the helicopter is hovering stably. But I want to point out that Golems does not have no medium, which means there is no air in the 3D environment. So the helicopter, even though it has rotors that are spinning, the rotors aren't producing thrust in a way that real helicopters produce thrust. So the rotors of my helicopter in this game are purely aesthetic to make it appear like a helicopter. So let me fly a helicopter from a fixed point of view to see how fast and how stable this flying machine is. Let me change the point of view to follow the helicopter. Now, let me show you the wire mode of my helicopter to show you the hidden components that makes up the helicopter. As you can see, there is many components that is hooked up to the helicopter. Even though this appears complex, it's actually comprised of sections or groups of components that are exactly identical to each other. The only difference is their location. And you can see the many input boxes that I've attached to the machine. All these boxes are key binded to a particular key on my keyboard so that I can control the direction and speed of this helicopter. Now that I've shown you how to make a basic hovering machine, let me show you a more sophisticated or more complex machine that I've made in Golems. And this machine looks quite familiar to a real-life machine, so let me show it to you. I have recreated a replica of the space shuttle. I have used the same components as I showed you earlier to create this replica of the space shuttle. If you want to be notified any new videos that I upload to my channel, please consider subscribing to my channel. I will post more videos as soon as I can. And if you are interested in downloading this game, I will put the link at the end of this video. Thanks for watching!